What's India's diplomatic position? How is India going to be navigating this turbulent situation in West Asia that's having a global impact? Vasudha, Prime Minister Modi, I believe, has spoken with Bahrain and Saudi leaders as well. What are you picking up from the PMO in terms of what the Prime Minister had shared with those leaders in West Asia?
Prime Minister Modi made two important phone calls today. One was to the King of Bahrain and one to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Also, the Prime Minister, MBS, and what I understand is that the Prime Minister has spoken about the safety of Indians who have been stranded in these countries. Remember, there are more than 40 lakh Indians who work in different countries, in Gulf nations, in different places in Gulf nations. The Prime Minister today has not just spoken about the safety of these Indians, he has also condemned Iranian attacks on Gulf nations, and this is just after the 4-hour CCS meeting that took place last night after the Prime Minister returned to Delhi from Madurai. And what I understand is that while the safety of Indians is at the center of India's approach, India is also navigating the situation very carefully to ensure that its response has its own national interest and multi-alignment at the center of its response.
That's right, Vasudha. Also, multiple questions have been raised about India's stance itself. The Prime Minister, of course, speaking to these countries which have a long-standing partnership with India in terms of the safety of Indians there. And remember, several of them, including several legislators from different parts of India who were touring the Middle East, stranded there, stuck in places like Dubai. What are you picking up in terms of from the Ministry of External Affairs, from the PMO, in terms of measures putting in place to get Indians back home?
Well, rescue is topmost priority for the Indian government. But Veera, what I understand, with the airspace closed, there are very limited options for India as well, and it is looking at not just diplomatic channels, but it's also looking at ways to navigate the situation diplomatically and also logistically. There's going to be economic fallout of the situation as well, with energy supply chains being choked as well. But right now, India is just focused on safety of Indians who have been stranded, but with the airspace closed, there are limited options, and in some ways India is also waiting and watching for this war to cool down a little bit so that it can get its own citizens safely out of these countries.
That's one concern. The other concern, of course, for India will be about ensuring that oil supplies are not disrupted, which could be vital for the economy. Vasudha, India has made its stance as far as this West Asia conflict is clear, many would argue, in terms of the escalation that's been playing out.
That's right. The Prime Minister has reacted to the escalating US-Iran-Israel conflict, and he has said that the situation in West Asia is a matter of grave concern for us. That's what the Prime Minister has said, Veera. He's also said that the Indian government will keep working with countries in West Asia to ensure safety of Indians who are living there. Meanwhile, Veera, what we understand is that India has not condemned the killing of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei because, as per sources, India's position mirrors that of major global powers, and it has kept its own policy of multi-alignment and national security, national safety, strategic safety at the center of its response.
That's right. In fact, the government's argument, of course, as far as its stand is concerned, is that only 10 out of 57 Muslim-majority nations have formally condoled the death of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and remember, the Ayatollah had on multiple occasions publicly commented on India's internal matters on Kashmir. According to the Indian government sources, he had echoed Pakistan's position repeatedly, and during the 2020 Delhi riots, he had made controversial social media posts critical of India. So multiple points being put out by sources sort of justifying India's stand as far as this is concerned, Vasudha. But this comes in the midst of sharp targeted questions being raised by the domestic opposition in India in terms of the stand that's taken and the fact that the leader of a sovereign state has been killed by US-Israel strikes.
That's right, Veera. Let's also listen into what the Prime Minister said.
पश्चिम एशिया की वर्तमान स्थिति हमारे लिए गहरी चिंता का विषय है। भारत डायलॉग और डिप्लोमेसी के माध्यम से सभी विवादों का समाधान का समर्थन करता है। इस क्षेत्र में मौजूद सभी भारतीय नागरिकों की सुरक्षा के लिए हम सभी देशों के साथ मिलकर काम करते रहेंगे।
When it comes to diplomatic matters, especially volatile diplomatic matters, India has always played the balancing act, and it has always ensured that the multi-alignment policy remains core to its foreign policy approach. So why did India not condemn Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's killing? Sources in the government have told us that India's position is exactly what major global powers have said, and it is also in line with what G7 country has, every G7 country has done. Remember that no G7 country has issued condolences at the killing of Khamenei,
right,
and only about 10 of the 57 Muslim countries have condoled the death of Khamenei. So India's response is driven by strategic interests, it's driven by national interest. National interest remains priority of India's foreign policy is what we understand. And Gulf nations, which have also been caught in the crossfire, in fact, they have also been facing explosions and strikes by Iran. India has been a key partner of these Gulf nations, and repeatedly India has been condemning these attacks, and it has only been talking about safety of its own Indians, its own citizens stranded in these countries. Opposition's framing of India's silence as communal is baseless according to government sources, and that sovereign responses have only prioritized national interest, which is exactly what India's response has done, is what government sources have told NDTV.
That's right. Remember, one of the most important aspects as far as India is concerned, Vasudha, and for the world as far as this West Asia conflict, which is escalating, is concerned, is about the supply of oil. Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, Vasudha, posts on X that in view of the ongoing geopolitical developments in the Middle East, the Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas has reviewed the supply situation for crude oil, LPG and other petroleum products with senior officials from the Ministry and PSUs, which are essential. We are continuously monitoring the evolving situation, and all steps will be taken in order to ensure availability and, remember, most importantly, affordability of major petroleum products in the country, according to that post. That's a key concern as far as India is concerned, perhaps for the rest of the world as well, because the Straits of Hormuz is critical for India, as well as the escalating situation there could affect oil imports, and given the PSUs which are delivering oils to the people of India, Vasudha, any oil price shock again will be something that the government will be looking at very closely in terms of impact. We'll have to wait and see how this watches out. Obviously the government looking at this very, very closely, Vasudha.
That's right. Let me go across to our colleague Himanshu, who joins us. Himanshu, like Veera was pointing out, the Strait of Hormuz is an important transit point. It's important in terms of the fact that, a big portion of not just seaborne crude oil, but also, gas passes through this very narrow corridor. So help us understand, how is India looking at ensuring that it is prepared for all situations?
Well, there are two things. One, it is important to understand that the crude oil prices today jumped beyond $80 during trading. And this is the highest price in the last 1 year. And for a country like India, which imports around 85% of its crude oil needs from different countries, this is, of course, a very, very challenging situation. Because oil economists say that every $1 increase in the price of crude oil could increase India's oil import bill by around $1.4 billion. So clearly that is the context in which Petroleum Minister has reviewed the situation. There are two things. One, I have seen the marinetraffic.com data, which clearly shows that there are very few ships now which are now actually transiting through the Strait of Hormuz. While officially Strait of Hormuz still open, but considering the risks of the war, most of the cargo ships are now either being diverted or they have been parked in safe zones across major ports in this area. And that is one reason why, when I had actually seen the Strait of Hormuz traffic through the marinetraffic.com website, there were just 2, 3, 4, 5 ships that were visible in that zone. So that essentially means that around 20% of the total global oil supplies that goes through Strait of Hormuz is now virtually on a standstill. And that is the context in which Petroleum Minister has reviewed the situation. Brent crude oil price is rising. In 1 day, it has risen by 9%. It has gone beyond $80. Analysts are saying that if this uncertainty increases, the crude oil price will continue to increase, and that means more pressure on India's oil import bill. So there are alternative options that government has to think of, and one, of course, is the strategic reserve issue. Remember, in the budget session, Petroleum Minister did inform Parliament that
Right.
India has strategic reserves of up to 74 days for meeting any kind of exigency in the region. But India has to be on alert, and that is exactly what Petroleum Minister has done.
Absolutely, not just India, every country is on the alert as far as that situation is concerned. Rightly pointed, Himanshu, and you also point out about the stock that's already there. Vasudha, this is perhaps a very critical aspect, right? India's oil imports face a fresh West Asia risk. New Delhi has sharply reshaped its crude basket since the Russia-Ukraine war, leaning far more on Moscow, even as traditional supplies in the Gulf continue to dominate India's energy lifeline, Vasudha.
That's right, Veera. In fact, today, Russia alone accounts for about 31.5% of India's oil imports, turning into the single largest supplier in just a few years. But that does not really mean that West Asia risk has gone away. Iraq still supplies close to 18% of India's crude, and Saudi Arabia nearly 14% of crude.
And then the UAE more than 11%, keeping India heavily exposed to any conflict in West Asia and that Straits of Hormuz, as has been repeatedly mentioned, Vasudha. Add to that another big chunk, nearly 18% coming from quote-unquote other producers such as Nigeria, Oman, Qatar and Kuwait, and many of them perhaps flowing through those Straits of Hormuz as well. And it's clear that a large part of India's oil still rides on volatile geopolitics of West Asia, which is escalating at the moment.
I remember Indian, government sources telling me that they are trying very hard to diversify their oil supplies, especially because India was facing a lot of criticism for buying oil from Russia, and it also faced those penalty tariffs from the United States of America. But that said, Iran's share, Veera, has shrunk compared to the past. But with tensions involving Tehran now, this has also, of course, rattled markets. And like Himanshu was pointing out, oil prices are already going up. And this could also push up prices for India's entire import basket, is what we understand. However, the big picture, even with Russia now on top of the suppliers list, India's crude security remains tightly linked to West Asia.
That's right. Any escalation further in the region, especially in the Straits of Hormuz, or a complete disruption there, as Iran has warned, will immediately raise the risk premium on India's oil bill categorically. In fact, that's what the world's been watching very closely, and test the resilience of this new import mix. It's going to be a strategic decision that the government will have to take. Multiple facets at play there. Geopolitics on the one hand, energy security on the other, oil security, imports in terms of supply chain as far as that oil is concerned, Vasudha.
That's right, Veera. In fact, it's going to be a tightrope walk for several countries, including India. But the big question here is this an energy crisis test for India? That's the question a lot of people are asking. India, which imports nearly 85% of its crude, is staring at a serious energy test. So any sustained spike in global oil prices will not just raise India's import bill, it will also put additional pressure on the already volatile rupee. At the heart of this crisis, like we have been talking about, is the Strait of Hormuz, which is a narrow but critical choke point that carries 20% of the world's oil supplies.
Well, the 33 kilometers is the stretch, Vasudha, between Iran on the one side, Oman on the other. With the waterway effectively choked and shipping routes disrupted, the shock is now being felt in the form of tighter supplies and rising costs. Shipping disruption through the Straits of Hormuz is adding a fresh supply shock on top of already elevated prices, which we've been struggling with for a while, amplifying the risk for energy-hungry economies like India.
But tankers have already started facing delays and higher charges, is what we understand from reports, Veera. And those costs are quickly finding their way into headline oil prices. Global banks are also sounding the alarm. It might take a bit of a time before these prices go up. But yes, there is a little bit of breaking news that we have right now.
European gas prices surge 50%, Vasudha, after Qatari LNG production halts amidst that crisis. This is important to note. European gas prices have surged 50% after Qatar halts LNG production because of strikes perhaps from Iran. This is another worrying development that's coming in. Obviously, the number anticipation was always there that prices would surge, but how much? By 50% after that production was halted by Qatar.
That's right. Global oil prices have risen as Iran continues these attacks on US and Israel. And with Qatari LNG production getting halted, gas prices across European countries have surged 50%. That's the spike that one would have expected. But remember, this is also because there has been an escalation in the strikes. Vishal joins us with more details on this. Vishal, Qatari LNG production getting halted and the impact of that being seen on gas prices across European countries, something that was expected. What is it that the world needs to prepare for in the coming days?
Well, Vasudha, just to give the perspective, almost 1/5 of all global supply of LNG is dependent on this one company, Qatar Energy. And as far as India is concerned, 35 to 40% of whatever LNG India imports comes from Qatar. And Qatar Energy is the biggest company that Qatar has. So you can see that the effect will be felt across the globe. It's just a matter of time before this is reflected in Indian shores as well. So we'll have to wait for that. But as far as European markets are concerned, we are already seeing effects. The prices are
thank Vishal bhai.
as much as 45 to 50%.
Let me thank Vishal, and she wants to start the chatter. Let us start.
Thank you, Vishal, for joining us with those details.
Vishal.
We have Ayatollah Wilf, who's an ex-Israeli MP and co-author of The War of Return. We have Pinak Ranjan Chakravarti, former MEA Secretary. We have Dr. Tara Karta, former Director, National Security Council Secretariat. We have Professor Swaran Singh, who's a foreign affairs expert. He's a professor at the International Relations Department at the JNU. Thank you all of you for joining us on this broadcast. Mr. Wilf, to you first. Ayatollah Wilf, to you first. How are people of Israel looking at these attacks that have only intensified in the last 2 days? What is the situation on ground in various cities of Israel, considering that some of them are being struck even now?
Yes, Israelis remain united in their sense that as long as this war truly ends with the fall of the Islamic Republic and freedom for the people of Iran, sitting in the shelters is something that we are willing to take on for that goal. This has been one of the worst regimes in history, has made it their central tenet. Death to America, death to Israel, took the substantial capabilities and resources of a great country and essentially ran it to the ground, much like the Nazis and the Soviets and the Pan-Arabists did in their conspirations and obsession. So Israelis are united that as long as this is truly leading for the fall of the Islamic Republic, it is worth it. We want to see the people of Iran free. We remember who stood with us, not just for the last 2,500 years, but for the last 2.5 years. Iranians in the diaspora, many Iranians in Iran, they understood Hamas, Hezbollah for the Islamic forces that they are, that wanted nothing less than to destroy the state of Israel. And what we're seeing also is actually the attacks in the last day have been much more to the Gulf, to Cyprus. What we're seeing is a regime on its last breath, lashing out. You know, it used to be said that the Iranians are smart chess players, but maybe that means that the Islamic Republic is not so Iranian, because this is not chess masters. This is just people throwing over the board.
Right, that's the Israeli point of view. Mr. Pinak Ranjan Chakravarti, tell me from an Indian point of view, there have been questions about India's stance by the domestic opposition here. B, what would be India's most difficult concern at this stage in terms of navigating this that seems to be an escalating conflict in West Asia?
Well, firstly, I think India will look at it through the prism of its own national interest. And I would say 3 or 4 items that would worry us. One, of course, is the safety of our people who live there, work there, and it's almost 9 million. And so that is why Prime Minister Modi has been talking to the leaders of these countries to ensure. And of course, also, if there is a need for evacuation, we need, a corridor or something like that to evacuate. I remember when it happened, when Saddam Hussein occupied Kuwait, we had worked to produce a corridor to Jordan from where people were sort of evacuated. We have enough experience of evacuation, we have the capabilities, but you can't just do it overnight. And of course, people will have lots of things to say to their families, saying that, please get us out, please get us out. That kind of pressure builds up, of course. Secondly, I think it's the economy, our own economy, and I think and our energy security particularly, because that's where we are going to get hit quite badly, I think, because the prices of crude have already jumped, I think, to about 80 or so, and that would add billions of dollars to our bill. Moreover, I think if the oil doesn't flow from the Gulf countries, then we'll have to look for other alternatives. And where do we get it from? And I dare say we will probably go back to Russia to find that, because this is not something we can simply now
Okay.
somebody tells us that buy from Russia. It's not going to happen.
Ambassador Yash Sinha also joins us now from Ambassador. Ambassador Sinha, how diplomatically prepared is India for something like this? Because I was reading stuff on Iran by some experts, and they say that Iran is not like Iraq. It's much larger. It's much more complex than Venezuela. There's a deep state, and of course with Khamenei also getting killed, it doesn't mean that the system is going to collapse in a day or two or even in weeks. How prepared should India be diplomatically to deal with a new Iran, and how do you see that happening?
Thank you for having me. So I think you don't prepare for these things. These things happen. These are events that sort of happen. We have enough experience in the Gulf and dealing with these countries. And I think the government is taking a very measured tone. In fact, I feel this unnecessary controversy of whether India has condoled or India has issued a statement on the late Supreme Leader's death is really unnecessary, because we have to focus, as Ambassador Chakravarti said, we have to focus on this 9.6 million diaspora that we have in the Gulf, and also regarding our energy security. These are the challenges that the government and everyone should be are confronting. So I think, I personally feel bad that the Supreme Leader has been killed. I've met him twice as part of Indian delegations in the past. However, we have to proceed as per our national interests and what we think is our strategic interests in the region. And we have so many. And that is why the Prime Minister is working the phones. He has spoken to various leaders. Yesterday it was Abu Dhabi, the President of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed, and today it's been Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and other leaders. So I think it's important that we keep closely in touch with the governments in this region. Evacuating such a large population is going to be a Herculean task. But as Ambassador Chakravarti said, you need a corridor. And how do we find that corridor? Because we have both Pakistan and Iran separating us from that region. And a sea corridor would obviously take a long time because there's so many people involved. I think the best bet, as far as we are concerned, is that this conflict ends soon. And in such a way that there is minimum collateral damage, and certainly as far as our nationals are concerned, they're safe and sound. I heard that we've already lost one national today.
Let me get Professor Swaran Singh and Tara Karta as well in. Professor Swaran Singh, all of them arguing that India has to work in its national interest. How do you see India's stance? There have been questions raised by the opposition back home. How do you see India's stance as far as navigating this conflict is concerned?
I think if you look at how India has reacted in similar earlier conflicts, either in Ukraine or in Gaza, India has sought to persist with its what we call proactive neutrality, not to take any clear sides. But I also understand the fact that Prime Minister recently traveled to Jordan and Oman and more recently to Israel allows people to give certain interpretation to the proximity that India has increased with Israel. And the last visit I think the Prime Minister Modi had to Iran was 2016. So it's been almost a decade that any senior leader kind of had paid a visit to Iran. So it's subject to interpretations, but of course each nation, as you said, decides foreign policy by national interest. And therefore, one can fully understand why India's proximity with Israel is completely different today. And, in that sense, we are still trying to maintain that kind of neutrality by saying we are worried about the regional instability driven by our national interest of protecting our citizens in that region. That's why Prime Minister is speaking to various leaders. Foreign Minister has spoken to his counterparts in many of these countries. But I think other than the costs, which India may be capable of dealing with because we now have about 700 billion plus foreign exchange, but other than commodity costs going up, the delays are going to be another dangerous thing to happen, because if you reroute energy through Suez and Mediterranean and Cape of Good Hope, at least a month's delay. And when we talk about India's reserves lasting up to 74 days, you have to understand what that means.
I think that's the most important question. Tarakarta, because the Gulf nations are also involved here, and you may say that, they got caught in the crossfire, but then explosions are being heard there and they're also being struck. Has it really complicated this war situation, because the attacks only seem to be intensifying from all ends here? What is it in for India diplomatically, economically, and more importantly, even the human aspect, because there are lakhs of workers in these Indian workers in these Gulf nations?
See, as of till I think late last night, there was still an open question whether Iran was deliberately targeting the GCC or not. I think that is more or less clarified. I'm not certain. I mean, they were attacking the US installations, which they always said they would. And as of I have people from Dubai calling me. It seemed like it was debris from those attacks. So that was till last night. I'm not sure what it is now. Number two is, I think in terms of evacuations, we are going to now talk of the evacuations first of people who are sitting at the airports who have basically got nowhere to go. So we're not really looking at the large numbers yet. I mean, I don't think there is any need right now to think of Indians being moved out of these GCC states. By and large, things are, well, they're not perfect, but they're not that bad either. So immediate need is to get the people who are stranded in these airports out. And that, I think, is possible to negotiate. I think Ambassador may like to clarify, there has been a possibility of having a pause till on both sides, till, everybody's nationalists, not just ours. There's a bunch of people sitting out there, and I left them out. The problem, however, is I don't know who's in charge in Iran. I mean, that attack on Oman,
you don't know.
That attack from Iran, the president finally said, IRGC did it on its own. They were not certain who's, so whom do we be certain? If I send an aircraft, it will not be hit. I honestly don't know.
Important point that you're raising there. You're bringing out the other dimension in terms of who is in charge there. Thanks to all five of you for joining us here. I'm sorry we had to cut this conversation short because there's a bit of breaking news that's again coming in. Vasudha, again, obviously from West Asia.
That's right, Vida. US Central Command has released a video of the latest strike. Iran continues to maliciously launch ballistic missiles, indiscriminately targeting military and civilian locations throughout the region. That's what it has said. US forces remain on the hunt to eliminate this threat.
Of course, that video been released by the United States of continuing attacks from Iran. That's been playing out those Iran ballistic missile strikes. Video being released by the United States because we're not clear of where that location is. Of course, the US turning around, the Central CENTCOM of the US releasing that video and saying that they are very committed to this Operation Epic Fury.
US has also said that
the
country's resolve has never been stronger. US Central Command has released this video of an attack by Iran And it has also said that Iran continues to maliciously launch ballistic missiles. Moving on to other set of breaking news now. Series of blasts have also been heard in Lebanon. IDF says striking Hezbollah terror organizations in Lebanon. Remember, Hezbollah and Israel have also been trading blows as part of the three-day war that began on the 20th of February. Now, a series of blasts have been heard in the capital of Lebanon, Beirut, as well.
All right. Of course, all that bit of breaking news that's been coming in repeatedly. I believe we can also go across, Vasudha, at the moment to Ravi Agarwal, editor-in-chief of the Foreign Policy magazine, who's joining us live. Thanks very much, Ravi Agarwal, for speaking with us here on NDTV. My first question to you is about India's stance as far as this conflict is concerned. There have been several questions that's been raised. How do you see India's stance? Of course, there's a question of what's morally right or wrong, and B, a question of national interest that's been put forth by the government. How do you see this?
Look, I think New Delhi has to center and prioritize what is in its national interest. The question of morality is one for history to judge. Look, the morality on the U.S. side is quite clear. What I can say sitting in New York is, the United States and Israel have conducted these attacks with no national permission. They didn't go to Congress in the United States for this, nor was there any international permission, as we saw, for example, with the war in Iraq, which, misguided as it was, at least there was an attempt to get the international community to go along. So in many senses, the morality of this is a question that I think Americans will be asking more, since, of course, they are heavily involved. I think for the Indian side is quite different, and I imagine India would be quite glad to stay out of this as much as it can.
Mr. Agarwal, I do understand what is it in for Israel, but people are asking these questions. What was the compelling reason for US to do this? Because we did see last year what happened with Operation Midnight Hammer, and it was told to us that those nuclear bases had been obliterated. Are people in the US asking those questions of President Trump today, or the fact that the president came to power on an anti-war campaign? The fact that the West has not really criticized him, is that also something that people are willing to understand?
Look, this is not a popular war in the United States. Immediate polling suggests that most Americans are not in favor of U.S. wars more generally, but certainly of one in Iran, and definitely one that could be more prolonged, as this seems to be. Just yesterday, President Trump said that he could see U.S. involvement continuing for 4 or 5 weeks, which of course could mean that Iran would continue to lash out in a variety of ways, as we're seeing across the Gulf. And of course, Iranian targets are any country that has a U.S. base or has supported the United States in some way. Coming back to the situation here at home, you're right in saying that President Trump mostly had a platform of not miring the United States in foreign wars, but he did seem as if, especially with the Venezuela operation in January, that he was in favor of short, sharp bursts of force in other parts of the world with a clear outcome. And the Venezuelan outcome was decapitation, to kidnap the leader of Venezuela. The problem with Iran here and this operation is that it's not clear what the objective is. If the objective was regime change, then there's a fundamental misunderstanding of how the regime in Iran operates. This is not a one-person regime. There were contingency plans in place for a council to run the country. Ayatollah Khamenei had named successors, which will be revealed in due time. There were contingency plans for several key positions in the IRGC, in the security services. So this is a regime that has battered down, protests. It has, made it harder for reformists and opposition policymakers to have their voices heard. Regime change is going to be very difficult. And so increasingly a question that many in America will be asking is, at what point does this end? What are the goals and ends that we need to see achieved before the United States can say our job is done?
Well, that's a very important point. And taking off from that point, Ravi, given that there has been no domestic support or low domestic support for this endeavor or an adventure, A, how worried are you that this could turn into a misadventure that could escalate further? And B, more importantly, what does this send across to the larger global world order that we've been speaking about? Because there are concerns, while we can dismiss the question of moral right or wrong, there are concerns over what this really sends out in terms of optics, whether what happened at Ukraine, Venezuela, or in Iran.
Yeah. Those are great questions. By the way, I just want to say one more quick thing about morality before I actually answer your question. What would have been moral would have been for Khamenei to answer to his people. What would have been moral would have been him at a war crimes tribunal. I'm no fan of this regime or of Khamenei, to be very clear. But one must also be able to say that unilaterally taking out the leader of a country is illegal. So those two opposing truths can be grappled with at the same time. I just want to put that out there to be clear. But on your point of the ripple effects of what could happen now, I mean, they're immense. I mean, the first order ripple effects are that several of the Gulf countries, Arab allies, are going to get mired into this conflict in ways that are extremely unpredictable. Think of the scenes we're seeing out of Dubai, in Saudi now. And this could get worse because Iran, as I was saying, this is a regime now that feels that they have their backs against the wall. This is existential for them, literally was existential for Khamenei, but they're going to keep lashing out. We know that they have many thousands of ballistic missiles. We also know that the interceptors it takes for other countries to stop those missiles are extremely expensive. So, and they're going to run out of them eventually. So there is a possibility in the coming weeks that Iran could impose serious costs on Israel, but also on other U.S. allies in the region that could see civilian damage, infrastructure damage, the kinds of things that make wars dramatically more unpopular than if they are hypothetical events happening far away. So we must keep open that possibility for this to turn much worse for the United States and its allies. That's first order. Second order, of course, is that these are the types of things that could also lead to attacks on the United States, domestic terrorism, sleeper cells. There are a range of possibilities here that are extremely worrying. Terrorism could be on the rise. That we shouldn't discount. And I would imagine that the people who watch these kinds of things in the US and in Europe are going to be on extremely high alert for several weeks and months to come,
right,
both in the cyber domain and the hard infrastructure domain.
Ravi Agarwal, I was looking at President Trump's speech, just listening to it, and he says freedom is for the people of Iran to take. And, he is clearly calling upon the reformists and protesters to come take charge of the government. Do you see that happening in coming days? Because every expert on Iran says that Iran is not Iraq, it's not Venezuela. There is a system, there is a structure that is partly clergy, partly military, that's been in place for years. And Khamenei was not really involved in day-to-day functioning. If it's not going to be Khamenei, it's going to be somebody else. In that case, how prepared is the world for a different Iran, an Iran that could not be too different as well?
Once you go down the path of shooting down protesters, you don't stop. The only thing you can do after that is keep shooting them down. Think about it. Now that Iran has already taken that step in January, when President Trump said, "We will have your back, go out and protest," Netanyahu said the same thing, a version of that. And we've seen many thousand people get killed, by some accounts, tens of thousands of people. Though the relatives and friends of those people will be wondering if we go out on the streets to protest right now, by the way, as bombs are raining down, will the Basij, will the IRGC, will the soldiers, will they be on our side or will they just shoot us down? And so it's very easy to say go out and protest, but I think the reality on the ground is far more complicated. Let's also remember the internet is down. Iranians can't communicate with each other at all. So, and there could be ways in which the United States actually could be helpful there for example, by getting Starlink access to Iran, by asking Elon Musk to do that. So it's easier said than done. And I think the regime is such, as I was saying, a clerical regime, a military regime, that is not incentivized to stop at this point, because stopping is existential. That means whoever comes in power next will take them out.
Right, the means to an end as important as the end itself, perhaps some would argue, but of course multiple facets when it comes to the question of morality, reality and strategic ties. Thanks very much there, Ravi Agarwal, for taking time out and speaking to us here on NDTV.
Well, with that, it's time for a short break. More news and updates on the other side.